Hello, my name is Ria Gualano.
And I'm Jiang, and today we'll be presenting our paper, I Try to Represent Myself as I Am, Self-Presentation Preferences of People with Invisible Disabilities Through Embodied Social VR Avatars. This work was done with Kexin Zhang, Tanisha Shende, Andrea Stevenson, and Shiri Azenkot. Self-presentation is critical to a user's experience in social VR. Researchers have found that people with visible disabilities represent themselves through adding assistive technologies through their social VR avatars. And others have also investigated disability representation in digital spaces through meta avatars and Snapchat Bitmojis, finding that visibly disabled users want their avatars to show their full bodies, while invisibly disabled users prefer to use symbolism to represent their disabilities. However, there's still a big research gap here. We don't yet understand the preferences of people with invisible disabilities in immersive social VR environments. And this led us to our three research questions. How do people with invisible disabilities represent disability in social virtual reality avatars today? How can social virtual reality avatars better represent the experiences and identities of people with invisible disabilities? And lastly, when, why, and how do people want to share invisible disability identities and experiences using avatars in social VR?
To explore these three research questions, we conducted a series of semi-structured interviews via Zoom with social VR users who identify as being invisibly disabled. Then, as part of those interviews, we had a creative exercise that took place on a whiteboard or Google Jamboard, understanding that not everyone's preferred communication style is through speech. So we wanted to give users an opportunity to provide other forms of information and suggestions as well. We ultimately had 15 participants who represented 22 different invisible disabilities such as ADHD, dyslexia, and various chronic conditions.
And this led us to one of our takeaways. So, our first takeaway is that embodied avatars are dynamic, contextual, and multimodal. Participants felt that embodied avatars were much more authentic than non embodied avatars like profile pictures and Bitmojis, because they felt that these non embodied avatars were just a snapshot of their identity, whereas adjusting or customizing embodied avatars was more exciting and accessible. They also felt the interactive nature of embodied avatars was very important. The facial expressions, movements, and body language that could be conveyed in real time through these embodied avatars helped them with representing fluctuating energy levels or mobility. For example, P9 mentioned, social VR is an order of magnitude above anything you would see on Instagram. You can see all the details on the avatar, their facial expressions, movements, and body language, and it's real time. P2 also mentioned, as someone with bipolar disorder, your avatar can have a really upbeat energy, or your avatar would be a little bit lower on the energy. Friends can kind of match their energy to your mood without you having to be so vocal about it.
Our second takeaway related to current and desired invisible disability representations. So, some examples of current representations include hiding behind a tail to represent hiding from others in social interactions due to social anxiety, or changing an avatar's color to make it apparent to others that you are more or less interested in being approached for social interaction. Then there were also various desired representation preferences that were not currently available, such as a dynamic energy bar that would fluctuate in real time with energy levels, or a disability logo on a t-shirt to represent dyslexia or a chronic illness, etc. Then we found this dichotomy, these distinctions between private and public representation preferences. So private representations are implicit and they carry personal significance that others might not necessarily recognize. And then there are public representations, which are very explicit and quite broadly recognizable to others who may encounter them. In contrast with some of the private representations participants shared, such as P8's suggestion to have his avatar wear earbuds instead of headphones, his usual choice of music wear, to implicitly represent masking his disability, P1 shared a number of suggestions for public representations, such as spoon theory accessories like a giant spoon, or disability graphics and zebra print to raise awareness for rare diseases, a floating medication reminder, and various other assistive technologies.
And lastly, we found that invisible disability disclosure practices differed based on context. So we found that there were three types of disclosures: activists who would disclose in any context, situational disclosures, which was most of our participants, who sometimes disclosed depending on stigma perceptions and context, and then non-disclosures, who decided not to disclose a disability in any context at all. For example, P1 and activists said, anything that can start a conversation or encourage people to ask questions is really valuable to me. And I feel like having that option is just really important in terms of raising awareness. P4, who was a situational disclosure, did have a little bit more hesitation. They mentioned, we would mostly have to become friends outside of the virtual reality world for me to feel comfortable to disclose it. And lastly, P8, who was a non-disclosure, mentioned, friends that have also had my condition, it's like you're treated differently. I'm trying to hide it so much that outside of my family, I don't think I ever opened up to anyone about it.
So, from these three main themes, we generated a series of recommendations for designers and other stakeholders in VR. The first is to create more options for multimodal customization and interaction that reflect VR's unique affordances. The second is to include presets for both implicit and explicit options for invisible disability representation on social VR customization platforms. The third is to support dynamic disclosure preferences and fluctuating disability experiences that the user can toggle on and off in different contexts. And the fourth is to make the avatar customization process more accessible and flexible, especially to users from non-technical backgrounds. And that concludes our presentation. Feel free to contact us at any of our email addresses if you have any further questions or comments. Thank you.